Welcome on in to the Wolverine podcast here on Monday, August 12th, 2024. Anthony Broom here with Clayton Safey. Unfortunately, Chris Ballas having some technical difficulties. So as of now, a two-man booth. We'll see if maybe he pops in a little bit later. Coming to you with a recorded episode this week. Next week, we'll be back to live and probably live throughout the remainder of football season. Don't hold me to that. I don't like making promises I can't keep, but that's what we're looking at now. A lot to go through today. First AP poll is out. We get a sense for where, the national football writers see Michigan compared to the rest of the country. We'll talk about that. Clayton and I were in Ann Arbor this morning for press conferences with a handful of Michigan players, Kenneth Grant, Samaj Morgan, Jer Hill, Josh Preeb, a lot to sift through there. And then, as we do every week, we will take your questions to end the show. But Clayton, happy Monday. We're getting closer and closer as of today, 19 days out from the start of the 2024 season.
Absolutely. It's exciting.
All right. Short, sweet, and to the point. Let's talk first before we get into, as we like to say, the meat and potatoes of today's program. We are brought to you today first by our friends over at HomeField Apparel. Listen, anyone who's watched anything that we've done with HomeField or stuff I've done with HomeField going back a few years, like I always say, I have a drawer full of their stuff at home. I mean, it is the premium vintage apparel brand there is out there. I love their designs, love their Michigan collection, love a lot of the other schools that they have. I've got shirts from them from a ton of other schools, including my alma mater, CMU. I think I've got a Tulane shirt in there. I think in North Dakota State somewhere as well. But a lot of great stuff going on over there, including their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. Some of the features of this campaign that they're running in the month leading up to the start of college football season are the football boxes, coaches' jackets, bomber jackets, Champions Week. They're adding 5 new schools to the roster. The football boxes, though, are the bread and butter of this campaign. There's 55 schools that will get a box filled with exclusive items that contains 3 never-before-seen items for your school that are not available anywhere else. You can't get them a la carte. They're only in the football box. They're curated so fans will have new gear to wear all season long and suitable for all weather conditions. Michigan opens its season on August 31st. You're probably going to be in shorts and one of those home field T-shirts. But when you come to a game in October or November, a lot of big games in November this year, you're going to need to bundle up a little bit. They'll have sweatshirts and such for you in there as well. So the Platinum Box VIPs receive additional exclusive items, a new hat or ringer, VIP koozie, and the 2024 Platinum Pass, which guarantees 20% off and early access to your school's football releases throughout the 2024 season. So to take advantage of this, head over to HomeFieldApparel.com. Use promo code Wolverine to get 15% off your first order at HomeField. That's promo code Wolverine at HomeFieldApparel.com to get 15% off your first order. Thank you again to our friends over at HomeField. We are also brought to you today by ourselves. The promo code UM1, which gets you 2 months of premium access to the Wolverine.com for only $1. That's going to get you on the message board. That's going to get you inside access to Ballas's Inside the Fort. Clayton contributes to that as well. The whole staff, their paywalled content, the recruiting guys are incredibly busy right now, and a lot of intel and analysis in the lead up to the 2024 season. That's promo code UM1 for 2 months of access for $1. And that is what Clayton Safey terms the best deal in America. Let's move into the best college football show in America. That would be ours. And speaking of the national outlook, the first AP poll is out as of today. Michigan comes in at number 9 overall as they transition into the Sharon Moore era. You're defending the college football playoff national title. Got a lot coming back, but a lot of question marks too. Michigan is one of 6 Big Ten teams in the first AP poll. And remember, the Big Ten is now up to 18 teams. Also in the top 25 are Ohio State at number 2, Oregon at number 3, Penn State at number 8, USC at number 23, and Iowa at number 25. Of course, Michigan's going to play Ohio State, Oregon, and USC this upcoming season, in addition to the AP poll's number 4 ranked team, which is the Texas Longhorns, which we'll see in week 2. So Michigan's going to play the number 2, number 3, number 4th ranked teams in the country. They come in as the number 9 ranked team in the country. Clayton, too high, too low, just about right. How do we feel about where Michigan lands here?
Yeah, I never really have too many huge reactions to these because they're kind of irrelevant. But it feels, about right coming in. I don't. The one thing I disagree with when some people vote on these and take schedule into account, where it's like, oh, this team has an easy schedule, like Penn State. Maybe that's why they're one spot ahead of Michigan at 8, where they avoid Oregon, they avoid Michigan this season. So they have an easier path. So maybe I'll look better as a voter if I have them higher. And at the end of the year, they finish higher because of their schedule. So I don't know how everyone voted, what their criteria was, but it's definitely interesting to look at. And it's definitely a sign that football is coming here. And interesting with Georgia at number 1, this is from Brett McMurphy. Godspeed, number 1, Georgia. 18 of the last 20 AP preseason number 1 ranked teams failed to win the national title, including Georgia last season. I do remember who won the national title last year. It was
Spoiler
Michigan.
alert.
Michigan came in number 2 coming into last season. Ohio State sits in that spot this year. And then a couple more interesting things from Brett McMurphy as well. Let's see. There were a couple good tweets he had. He said this year's champ, either number 1 Georgia, number 2 Ohio State, number 3 Oregon, number 4 Texas, number 5 Alabama, number 6 Ole Miss, or number 7 Notre Dame. Since 2004, every national champ ranked among the AP's preseason top 7, except for Florida State in 2013. They started 11th, and Auburn in 2010. They started 22nd. So Michigan's outside that line right now. Of course, it's just historical data to tell us what the trends are saying, which I find interesting. But the caveat here is that the 12-team playoff is here. So it's going to be interesting to see, will the best team be able to win, a certain amount of games in a row to win the national title? Will the 5 seed, as we talked about, a month or 2 ago on this show, be in actually the best spot out of anybody, a non-conference champion going into the playoffs? So how much do the rankings matter when the seeding are going to be kind of jumbled up with conference champions in the top 4, group of 5 team getting in? So much to talk about with this. It's just really interesting, and it gets you excited for the season.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about this. Maybe it was when the coaches poll came out or the all Big Ten, whatever it was. And you made the point that these don't really matter because there's no accountability in following up on them later in the year. So, but when you look at just things on paper, or how, to me, I look at this more in tiers. I think when you look at I think you could make a case for any of those top 4 teams in any order, but I think those are probably the 4 best teams in college football, at least on paper. From there, I think that Michigan is pretty firmly in that next tier with Alabama and Ole Miss. And again, Notre Dame's always a wild card. I feel like they're always up here and then lose the game somewhere they're not supposed to and lose to the best games or the best teams on your schedule. Penn State, same deal, kind of have dealt with a lot of the things that Michigan dealt with pre-2021 in terms of you're right there, you're in the conversation, but when it comes time to play the 2 big boys in the conference, or now there's a few more than those, you kind of fall short. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with where Michigan is. I think I could make a case for them where Notre Dame is. I could make a case for them at 8. But again, all this really does until we get into college football playoff rankings in November is, when Michigan and Texas play in week 2, there's probably going to be a 4 next to Texas, and there's going to be a 9 under Michigan or next to Michigan, maybe a spot or 2 fluctuation depending on what happens with the other teams. But it's just these are the numbers now. We know what the number next to everyone's name is going to be when that first weekend of games kicks off, and that's really the biggest takeaway from there. Again, I think knowing what we know about USC, they're probably just sneaking into the top 25 because of name brand recognition. There's a lot of name brand recognition in these type of preseason polls, but I think number 9 makes sense. I think you could make a case for them a spot or 2 lower. I think you could make a case for them a spot or 2 higher. But when you look at what this Michigan team does have on paper, and we'll talk about what some of these guys have said with what they think they have here in a little bit, but it does feel right. I guess, do you have? I know you said it doesn't really matter, but Do you have any thoughts on who's ahead of them? Would you nitpick at all? Where do you at?
Well, I think the thing that a lot of people are going to have an issue with is Notre Dame and Penn State ahead of Michigan. You kind of touched on it a little bit there, especially Notre Dame, though. Just given that Marcus Freeman has failed to meet expectations his first 2 seasons, taking over for a program that was very good under Brian Kelly, had made the college football playoff, a year before Brian Kelly ended up leaving. So Marcus Freeman still has a lot to prove. And obviously James Franklin in year 10, or now it's 11. Yeah, it's 11 for him. Has a lot to prove as well still. He won one Big Ten championship back in 2016, but like you said, has failed to get over the hump. The biggest thing for me, though, when you look at this as a whole and you kind of take Michigan out of it for a second and don't necessarily just look at those top 7 that Brett McMurphy pointed out, that historically have the best chance of winning the national championship. Look at the entire top 25. Every single one of those teams could get into the playoff this year. There are teams that are not ranked that are going to get into the playoff. Michigan in 2021 was the first team in history to get into the 4-team college football playoff after starting the season unranked in the AP poll. But there are going to be teams in this year's college football playoff, top 12, that are not ranked right now that are going to get in. And the obvious thing is here, there's no group of 5 team in the top 25. There is going to be one in the CFP, but I would wager a guess that there's also a Power 5 team, at least one that's not ranked, that gets in. So all these games are going to matter. I know we've talked about this in the past, but no game will ever have as much riding on it as, say, Michigan, Ohio State last year. But there will be more games that have a lot riding on them still. Going into November, you could have 2 losses. Hey, if you run the table, you're pretty much in, especially if you're a Michigan or a team in the Big Ten or SEC. So there are going to be a ton of exciting games this season. And even Notre Dame, right? Like, we can talk all we want about how maybe they're too high here. Well, they have to play A&M, and they go to College Station week 1. They'll be able to prove themselves at least for 1 week right away. So it's going to be kind of exciting to see kind of the pecking order here, how teams, how things play out, and then who wins the conference championships to get the buys.
Yeah, I think the thing that, kind of piggybacking off of that too, is that, when you look at where Michigan sits, I mean, if you're going to get into this 12-team playoff, which we've been talking about this for months, what the schedule is and what it might take, but you see 2, 3, and 4 on your schedule, and you're thinking, man, if they find a way to get in this playoff, they will have scratched and clawed and slugged their way there. Even if they win any of those games, that's a signature rubber stamp win that probably does a lot for you. And if you win 2 of them, I mean, hell, you might be talking about having one of those top 4 seeds. So, again, does it mean anything? Not really. Does it get me excited 19 days out for college football? Absolutely it does. So, any other thoughts on the AP poll, Clayton?
Yeah, the term battle tested is probably overused in college football. Like, I remember the 2019 Michigan team using that a ton. It's like, well, really all you guys have done is lost a couple games. Like, if you would have won, like, it wouldn't feel like that would have been the narrative, but that was going into Ohio State. Yeah, we're battle tested. It's like, yeah, but you guys don't have experience winning those big games. But if Michigan does get through this schedule and make the college football playoff this year, it will have been battle tested, and it will not be afraid of anything coming its way in the playoff. If you have to go play at Tennessee or Ole Miss or Alabama in the first round, like, that's not going to be easy at all. But this Michigan team will have gone through a pretty, much of a gauntlet of a schedule, and we'll be ready for anything. So that's an exciting part of it too, is that big games won't be, few and far between anymore. There's going to be a lot of big games. And I guess that's beyond the AP poll. That's just more of a landscape of college football thought, but in Michigan schedule thought, but it's going to be fun.
Well, and it helps too. You get number 3 and number 4 at home this year. So that could be fortuitous for them as well. And yeah, I guess that would be my final thought too, is that, whenever we've had this 4-team playoff, there's always consternation about, well, who deserved to be there and who played who and who deserved to be seeded what. Like, if you see this through to the end, especially knowing, the SEC expands the way it does, and they're already arguably, the most competitive conference in the country. You see the Big Ten expand the way it does. I mean, whoever wins this thing is just it. They're going to be gassed. Their spring ball is probably going to get pushed back a month, almost a month, like we saw with Michigan this year. They're going to earn it. And again, I know there's some people that don't like that the stakes are getting kind of taken away week to week, but I think you can argue that even more so. There's never been more on the line than a lot of these games that Michigan will play this season. So I'm excited for it. 19 days out. They got to start with Fresno State, and we'll see what happens from there. But let's move to Team 145 on the field and not just in the polls. On Monday, we spoke to 4 players. We spoke to Josh Preeb, Samaj Morgan, Jer Hill. And why is the 4th guy escaping me?
KG?
Kenneth Grant. My God. It's been a long day. A lot to sift through there. In some ways, guys that we haven't seen a ton from yet. Josh Preeb played his football at Northwestern. Jer Hill basically took a redshirt year last year. He's probably your number 2 cornerback. Samaj Morgan, kind of a gadget guy last year, now is going to be a little bit of everything. And then, the most proven guy is Kenneth Grant, who kind of the main thing he talked about today was that, the focus has been improving his conditioning. He's a guy that played 25, 30 snaps a game last year. He wants to be on the field for probably 50, 60. Michigan wants him on the field for that. And I think it's kind of emblematic of, and maybe this is where we start, like this roster as a whole is that, yeah, we think they have guys that can play, but how do you react to having much more of the world and much more of, make or break your team's success on your shoulders? And I think Kenneth Grant is kind of maybe one of the biggest names in that because he single-handedly changed the national championship game. Can he do more of that now? Can you do it for 20 more snaps a game? Are you going to be gassed in the 4th quarter? I think, it's a little bit different for him because he's a defensive lineman, but I think that's kind of a through line for all these guys. How much more can you handle?
I agree. And it's twofold because one, you do have a lot of guys that didn't have to do as much in years past and are going to have to step up into bigger roles. But secondly, these are really hungry players that, want to be in that role. We've talked about it in the past, but, Kenneth Grant is now going to be a full-time starter. He started 5 games a year ago, but, he wants to be, a big piece of this defensive line. He was last year, but an even bigger piece. He played just under 27 snaps per game last season. The Michigan defense was on the field for 59.2 snaps per game last year. They did a really good job staying off the field, getting off the field. And then the offense did a really good job possessing the football and sustaining drives so that they didn't have to come back out there. So I would guess that number goes up this year. I would guess Kenneth Grant doesn't have to play 60 snaps per game, but I would guess that he will play close to that in maybe some game. Who knows how something will go. And if they need him to be out there with less depth and a heightened level of competition in the regular season schedule, then it sounds like he is at least attempting to be ready for that. But it seems like they're building a little bit of depth there. I thought it was really interesting and encouraging as well, his comments on how much they're prioritizing getting pass rush from the interior, collapsing the pocket. He said he was talking to some of the quarterbacks who said, yeah, when you guys collapse the pocket from the interior, it's actually the hardest because then you don't know where to go. They got to either, roll to the right, roll to the left, or it'll rush them and they'll make a mistake. So he's understanding the importance there. And they did a great job rushing from the interior last season. That was a huge emphasis that Chris Jenkins set the tone on starting back last January when he said, we want to obsess over being better as pass rushers from the interior. And they did that. They upped the numbers. Don't have it right in front of me, but I think close to 10 more sacks from the interior than the year before. So I think that's an emphasis again, and with him and Mason Graham and Rayshon Benny, who Kenneth Grant said is looking very healthy and hasn't complained at all about any pain or anything like that coming off the injury he suffered in the Rose Bowl. They got the horses to do that.
I thought there was an interesting amount of, I don't know if social media backlash, but we'll say discussion. I had tweeted out that Kenneth Grant says the offense gave us a run for our money. The offense gave us a run for our money the other day. Coach Wink got on our ass about that. And I was kind of surprised by the amount of people who are like, I don't know what this means. Does this mean that the defense isn't as good as we thought? Should I be excited about the offense? And my response to that would be, I ultimately think that you want to hear about push-pull and back and forth in fall camp. It's the whole iron sharpens iron thing. You want we know the horses they have on defense. We know the talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball. We know the questions they have on the offensive side of the ball. And again, over the course of a 5 or 6 week camp, some days you're just going to drag ass. Other days you're just going to get beat. Other days you're going to completely dominate. And I think ultimately when you look at, what does it mean when you hear that the offense is ahead of the defense or the defense was dominant this day? I just, based on what we've heard, each unit has kind of got the best of each other at times in this camp. And to me, that's the best case scenario, because a lot of what we heard behind the scenes in spring ball was that the defense was way ahead and the offense had some struggles. So to me, I'm not pushing a narrative that, Michigan's offense is elite because it had a couple good days against their defense. But to me, that's an encouraging sign.
It's like when you're watching a spring game and there's a big play on offense, everyone cheers. But if you're also a fan of that, the team, you're also a fan of the defense, and it means something bad happened for the defense, and vice versa. If there's an interception, it means one of your quarterbacks threw an interception. So it's kind of how it goes until you're facing someone else in a different colored jersey. It's just the way it goes. You want the offense to be able to win some of those battles. And Kenneth Grant was asked today, is it 60-40, the defense winning those? Is it 50-50? And he said, no, it's around 50-50. And I know that he mentioned that the other day, Wink had to get on their ass. And, Quentin Johnson said last week, the offense got the better of us on, I believe it was last Tuesday was when that happened. He said it on Wednesday. And those are encouraging when you're thinking about the offense, because that this is a really good defense and that the offense is replacing a lot. You don't want that to be the case every day, but I think it's a positive in general. And I will say, and TJ Guy said on Friday last week too, that the offense is starting to really click and it's looking like a cohesive offensive line group. The run game is starting to look like a Michigan run game. To me, that it's all encouraging. And I do think the defensive guys that get up and step up in front of the microphone are being a little modest, probably. Again, I'm not there. I don't know, but I would not take this as if the defense is struggling. I think they're having their fair share of wins as well, with the amount of talent they have over there and how positive we've heard about just the way they're playing in general. So I think they're being a little modest, but I also am encouraged by the fact that the offense is winning some of those battles too. Yeah,
and you take it with a grain of salt. I mean, some of those guys could come out and blow smoke and whatnot, and that's just kind of how this goes.
They're being good teammates. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not going to come out and say, "Oh yeah, we've dominated. These guys can't move the ball against us." But I just think if you're someone that's you hear that, you're trying to figure out how do you process that as a takeaway. I think it's just the push pull. It's just football. It's camp. So to me, that's where we're at there. Moving on to Jer Hill. Super interesting guy. I mean, I think that's the first time that we've talked to him. Did we talk? I don't think we spoke to him after the spring game where he played pretty darn well. I could be wrong there, but again, I think a little taller than I thought he was. Certainly kind of a lankier guy. You can see how he sort of has the frame to maybe grow over these next 2 years. But in the here now, it seems like he is the leader to be Michigan's number 2 cornerback. He told us that his nickname Sugar comes from the fact that he always has some kind of candy on him. And he is I believe, what did he say? A Sour Patch Kid or Gushers. That was the one.
Is that candy?
It's a sugar bomb. I don't know if that counts as candy, but for a guy who's named Sugar, I mean, that does fit, right? So it was nice to kind of, kind of a quiet guy, reserved guy. I think he plays different than that on the field. There is a little bit of chip to his game. But yeah, I mean, this is the leader for Michigan's number 2 cornerback job. I think a lot of these other guys are kind of pushing him, like Amir Hall, like Ricky Johnson. But, going back to what Sharon Moore said a couple weeks ago, they see him as a starter right now. And you hear more about that as opposed to, nickel, where you hear that Jaden McBurrows is mixing in with Zeke Berry. Like, it kind of feels like this is his job to lose, or not just to lose. It just feels like it's his job.
At the very least, I feel like he's going to rotate in quite a bit. And I don't know exactly how Amir Hall has done acclimating himself. Josh Wallace last year coming in the summer from UMass did a fantastic job of picking up the defense, which was completely different than what he ran under Don Brown with the Minutemen out there. So if Amir Hall can do the same thing, as a guy coming in from a little bit of a lower level at the FCS level from Albany, was an All-American at that level, then, I think that he should be able to earn some snaps early on. But Jer Hill, I'm fairly comfortable with him there. And by the way, the nickname too he mentioned it used to be his late uncle's. When he passed away, they gave it to him as well. And it seems like it fits because he said he always has candy on him, but he had already eaten that day's candy. By the way, the press conference was right around 9 a.m. So he already had some sugar in the system, or sugar in the system. But I really liked, and like you said, he doesn't talk a lot, a little bit more quiet. It was very similar. I interviewed him last summer at an event, but yeah, this was his first press conference as a Michigan player. So obviously somewhat intimidating, not that the media contingent is intimidating at all, but just stepping up there.
Yourself.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job. I thought that one of the positives from his comments to me was, just about last season where he came in, he was the second highest rated commit in Michigan's 2023 class, just behind Eno Etta, according to the On3 industry rankings. He played early, double-digit snaps in the first 3 games. Didn't play against Rutgers, saw some time against Nebraska on the road, made the 74-man travel roster, and then didn't play again the entire season. And that could be frustrating, but he got his red shirt, and he said, if I was on the sideline, I was on the sideline for a reason. I had to learn the playbook, had to get better, and that's how he took it is, hey, get better. He went to the coaching staff after last season. He asked them what he could do to see the field. They said, you got to pick up the defense a little bit better, follow around the leaders like Will Johnson and Makari Page. And from all indications, he's kind of been following around Will Johnson. He's adopted his pre-practice stretching routine. He is, taking care of his body in a similar way to Will Johnson, maybe other than all the sugar that he's eating. But, so he's grown up a little bit. Will Johnson said last week that he's more reliable. He's where he's supposed to be. He's understanding, the concepts of the defense more. So those are the big things for a guy with that physical ability, because we've seen the physical ability like in 2 straight spring games now where he's flying all over the field, making tackles, which is really nice to see as well. He's a little bit slender, but he's pretty strong and, a little more wiry and has contact courage. So I'm very interested to watch Jer Hill early in this season. And I do think Michigan has enough at corner overall to get through this year and have a successful season that somebody will develop at some point. Again, you have a tough schedule early, but somebody will develop to be that nice complementary piece to Will Johnson.
And he's going to get tested early because nobody is going to throw at Will Johnson, right? So he's going to have opportunities to make plays. He's going to have some good one-on-one. I mean, if we're just putting down on paper like a top 3 or 4 most important players in that Texas game, he might be one of them when you just look like from a matchups perspective. So I'm excited. Part of the schedule and throwing these guys into the fire is seeing what a guy like Jer Hill can do. And, I think the world of his ability and, there is some maturity that comes with, all these guys at some point, you're the man. And then you're getting recruited by Michigan, who's been in the college football playoff. They've been competing for national titles. And then you get to campus and you feel like you suck because everyone's playing faster than you. The defense is so difficult to pick up. You're confident in your abilities and how you athletically measure up, but there's just so much more to it. And I think for a lot of guys, if you're able to push through the freshman year, some guys, the sophomore year, I think that's how you come out the other side is kind of a defining moment for you. And I just, that being the first time we've spoken to the young man, at least on that type of stage, I think he's got all the tools from a skill set perspective and also upstairs. So excited to see how he comes along. Samaj Morgan, a guy who has never lacked confidence, who has never felt that he did not belong on any football field with any player, freshman, senior, graduate, otherwise. He kind of comes out of the gates, and we've talked to him probably 5 or 6 times this summer at this point, including the golf outing stream that we did a couple weeks ago. And so not a whole lot to glean just from like a mentality perspective. Like, yes, he's trying to improve on anything. He went on a bit of not a rant, but, he talked about how Ron Bellamy has stressed, no block, no rock. You can't just be a fast guy. You can't just go out there and expect to catch the football. Like if your ass is going to be on the field at Michigan, you better block someone and you better put them in the dirt. And you better help spring plays for some other guys because they're going to help spring plays for you. And it seems like he's taken to that. Some other tidbits from him talked about how the quarterback competition is a true battle. All of those guys have impressed him. Whoever the starter is against Fresno State will definitely be ready for it, and that the team will, quote, be behind whoever is thrown into the fire. So he also said that each quarterback, when they throw the ball and you catch it, there's a little, I don't know what the sound he made was, but it was like a little. So he's impressed with what he's seen so far.
It's really interesting because he's very confident, as you said. He's not averse to making a bold statement. He keeps talking about this wide receiver room being dangerous. He said, like, that's what we're going to be going forward. Recruits are going to be flocking to Michigan and all this stuff. But then on the flip side, he embraces the culture at Michigan that you do have to block if you're going to be a wide receiver on the field. He's somebody that got the ball right away. First Big Ten game last season against Rutgers, he runs a slot fade. J.J. McCarthy hits him. He scores his first touchdown, and he made big plays throughout the year. All 4 of his touchdowns were really game-changing throughout the season in moments that Michigan needed them. And then he has the near touchdown against Iowa when he got ran down by his former high school teammate on the 87-yard punt return. So this is a playmaker that is buying into the culture, and I think he's already a leader as a sophomore. So it's a good sign. And, I think he's limited a little bit by his size, but I do think Samaj Morgan has more he can show down the field as a receiver. But that's one of the things he's trying to prove this season as well. And they're going to need him. Maybe they won't go down the field as much if the quarterback isn't going to be as good as J.J. McCarthy at throwing it like that. But, he can run after the catch as well. So his skill set may be kind of perfect for what they need.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you talk about what guys like him could mean for the guys of the future. It also kind of goes back to what Roman Wilson was. I think that he showed last year with his production within Michigan's offense with an elite quarterback that, he could make plays down the field. He could make, he could be a safety valve over the middle of the field. But when push comes to shove, he's a pit bull too. That's why, unfortunately, had an injury in camp. But when Roman Wilson gets drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're like, duh, that makes so much sense. So, I wonder if that is kind of like a new sort of standard or archetype of Michigan receiver where you're this explosive guy that can make plays. You can be a gadget guy. You can do just about anything in the playbook, but also you could put someone in the dirt too. And I don't know if Samaj is ever going to be that, but he talked about how during the recruiting process, like you said, he wanted to kind of be one of the guys that helped set the new standard. So really interested in seeing how Michigan's going to use him this year. I think he has a lot more to bring to the table. I watched him play a couple times in high school. It seems like whatever, in any scenario they put him in, he made a play somewhere just in the few games that I saw. So, we've been kind of hyping him up all summer. Physically looks the part, mentally has had it up there for a while. So excited to see what we get out of Samaj Morgan. Last but certainly not least, Josh Preeb, the Northwestern transfer. Somehow, one of the veterans in the room. You've got all these guys who have been here forever, but it feels like Preeb is one of those guys that fits right in seamlessly with the Greg Crippins, with Gio El Hadi, with Miles Hinton. And it seems like from his perspective, it's really started to come together, and a lot of what he said mirrors what we've heard in terms of the group is kind of gelling, and they are having their wins. They are having their one-on-one battles with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, and it goes back to what we just talked about. Iron on iron, everyone's getting better with the fall camp that these guys have had.
Michigan's had some really good transfers come in on the offensive line the last couple of years, and all of them that contribute right away and have a big impact have this common thread, right? And it started with Olu Oluwatimi, where it was like coming out of spring ball, people are saying, he could be a captain on this team. He's already leading this group. And obviously he had to kind of prove himself a little bit to the guys who had been there for a while. But he also comes in right away, and the first thing you can do to kind of earn your stripes is learn the playbook. And he did that. Drake Nugent last season did that. Same thing, goes for some of the other guys like Ladarius Henderson, who took it really seriously. I know he wasn't around last spring, but was given the playbook. And, while he was finishing up classes at Arizona State, I think was very close by, able to come into the building and things like that. So I think it's just like another example of a guy that's doing that early on here. He said he had the playbook down before spring ball, and then there were some things he had to get used to on the field as, spring ball went on. But now he said, not that much communication is even needed between him and the guys next to him, just because, maybe no one has to point him in the right direction and things. I'm sure they're still communicating because that's very crucial on the offensive line. But, you just have a kind of a seamless transition there with Preeb coming in. And, last week we got to talk to Giovanni Al-Hadi, who looks in great shape and who, said he's going to go out there and dominate. I want to be one of those dogs at Michigan. Michigan sent 12 offensive linemen that have been drafted in the NFL over the last 5 years. It feels like Preeb and Al-Hadi are going to be two at least of those guys coming up in the next year's draft, or Al-Hadi if he uses another year after the 2025 season. So they're really good at guard. They say that there's a competition at center. I feel like Greg Crippen is probably the favorite. Miles Hinton at left tackle, and some other tackles battling, but it seems like they're starting to pick things up a little bit. And again, going back to what TJ Guy said last week, the O-line is really starting to click, mesh together. And Josh Preeb said that was very intentional because they've been doing a lot off the field, a lot on the field, trying to make sure they have that chemistry come the season.
And it seems like they're in good hands too with Grant Newsome, very much cut from the Sharon Moore cloth. It's one of those things where, like, when you think about what a Jim Harbaugh team was, like they were always going to use the tight end, right? Like that seemed like that was sort of the box that a Jim Harbaugh team always got put into. Feels like a Sharon Moore team, probably always going to have a good offensive line. When you come from a background of coaching that group, I think there's a lot of pride in making sure that the standard you set that allowed you to move up into the position that you're in remains high. And I think that, again, we don't know what the ceiling of this group is, but I think that they're going to put a 5-man group together that is going to be pretty good and maybe one of the better units in the country. So we'll see what happens with all of that. Any other thoughts on Josh Preeb? I don't really have any other takeaways from him other than just feels like a fit, feels like a Michigan guy, feels like someone who would have got along great with Trevor Keegan and Zach Sinter, had their paths crossed, at a different time, but feels like a fit. And I like him a lot.
Yeah, he probably did get along with them too when he was being recruited, which is a good sign too, right? If he has their stamp of approval. But yeah, you're right. He feels like a fit. He feels like, one of those guys. And I do wonder with this O-line, like who is the guy that's going to really get them going in those big moments. It was Trevor, it was Zach in the past. I mean, the centers obviously have to set the tone as well. So I think Greg Crippen can add that. But who are the vocal leaders? I think that remains to be seen. Obviously, we're not there, so we don't know for sure. And you hope some of those guys emerge kind of this season to build that identity beyond just what they're going to do in terms of their technique and what Michigan's calling, but the identity of that O-line that they can really ride, to victories potentially down the line here.
What do you think? Time for questions?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, as is tradition, I'd like you to lead us off, sir. What do you got?
Well, 3Dub2 is wondering what our way too early 12-team playoff predictions are. That's a little hard to do without doing it in advance.
Or maybe Final Four?
But yeah, even that's hard to do because then we're predicting winners of games that you have to pick the opponent for, I guess. I mean, you could pick a top 4 just in general, but
yeah, that's
tough. Might be one to do down the road.
Circle back on, but he does say, how many teams do you think get in from the Big Ten and SEC?
Yes. And so it's kind of interesting because Matt Rule, Nebraska's coach, said at Big Ten Media Day that he thinks there should be 4 to 5 Big Ten teams in every year. That ruffled some feathers down in SEC country. They're basically, how dare you think that your conference is good at football. In the SEC, obviously, they don't care if they're offending anyone by saying they're going to get 4 or 5 teams in, but it is going to be fascinating to see how many teams can get in from the ACC and from the Big 12. The group of 5 is going to get one in. I'd be shocked in maybe 1 out of 10 years, 2 out of 10 years, they get another in. But I'm thinking 3 or 4 or 5 is probably pushing it for the Big 10 this year.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably 3 or 4 tops. I mean, Ohio State, Oregon are the easy ones. People will laugh, but Iowa kind of has a schedule that lends itself to maybe being one of those teams in the top 12.
It's not crazy at all. I mean, they finished top 12 a decent amount.
Yeah, so I mean, can they do? That's the thing. It's like, can Ferentz ball get you to the 12-team playoff? I think it can. There's a schedule right there. I mean, if you beat Iowa State, I mean, you're not going to go to Ohio State and win. Washington could be interesting at home, and then the back half of that schedule. I mean, Nebraska's probably the toughest game, and that's a home game. Wisconsin's a home game. Yeah, I mean, I could see Iowa kind of sneaking in. So there's a dark horse team. Not the question you asked, but the question that we've answered regardless.
Penn State being a team as well, along with Michigan, as teams that could sneak in. Can I read you Rutgers' schedule?
Yeah, because I've been seeing a lot of Rutgers hype. So let me see the schedule.
It's always funny to do this because you could play the schedule game, right? And it's one of the best games ever because you just go down, especially when it's your team, or like if someone does it with me with the Lions, it's like, all right, that's a win, that's a win, that's a win, But here we go, and it's pulled up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. So give us a like and hit the subscribe button as well. But Howard, Akron, Virginia Tech,
terrible
in Blacksburg.
They're so bad now, though.
Home against Washington, at Nebraska, home against Wisconsin, home against UCLA, at USC, home against Minnesota, at Maryland, home against Illinois, at Michigan State, and the situation trophy will be handed out after that one. I mean, after years of getting absolutely destroyed by the Big Ten East schedule, Rutgers gets a little bit of a reprieve here. You look at the schedule, if that was another team, you would say that they'd get in. Like, even if you go 10-2, maybe you could get in. But then you remember it's Rutgers, and then you remember it's Minnesota cast off Ethan Kaliakmanis at quarterback, and I would bet heavily against Rutgers making the playoff. But it's fun that we can do this with a 12-team playoff because you can imagine a scenario where Rutgers does get in. Again, I'm not betting on that, but look at that damn schedule.
I mean, they're gonna lose like 1 or 2 stupid games at least on top of the games they already probably should lose. So it's interesting though. You're right. It would be funny if after all these years you just get absolutely pumped and destroyed in this conference, and all of a sudden you win 10 games, and then you're gonna go play a playoff game in like Oxford, Mississippi. Be hilarious.
Or if someone has to come to Piscataway. Oh
my God! Well, talk about a home field advantage. There's train whistles. There's a carnival out front. There's, I don't want to. Hopefully, that's not a scenario we need to find ourselves in. But
hey,
yeah,
I'd watch.
Well, we'll be watching regardless. We're sickos, and it's also our job. Let's move on to Blue Thunder 24, who asks, considering Harbaugh's 1-year suspension, do you think Michigan reconsiders the merits of self-imposed suspensions for the future? Shouldn't Harbaugh's 3 missed games from 2023 be acknowledged as time served? And my response to that would be, it's just never going to be enough for them. Like, it just would never be enough because it hasn't been enough. So self-imposed suspensions, I mean, hopefully nothing, Michigan's not accused of anything that puts them into the category where their leadership needs to make that decision. But I'll just go to the Sherrod Moore thing for a second. Like, if there are these text messages out there that do not pertain to sign stealing at all, is it illegal to just speak to someone? I mean, we're not
that you work with. No.
Yeah. I mean, self-imposed, like, that's the other thing too, is that, listen, I've been kind of hard on Connor Stallions, but on the same token, like, he was an employee of the football program. He was an analyst. Analysts work with the coaching staff. They assist the coaching staff. If there's nothing there that implicates Sherrone Moore in any sort of sign stealing or anything illicit activity, we're not self-imposed. Anything is completely off the table. It's ridiculous.
You would hope so. You would hope so. I mean, they self-imposed last year to Jim Harbaugh for the cheeseburger gate. Obviously, that was disappointing. They backed down at the last minute before the TRO hearing on that Friday before the Maryland game. Chris Partridge got fired that day. So a lot of this is people kind of covering their own asses, right? And legal counsel telling the university that, hey, you could look bad here. Just do this, or, make a recommendation like that. Obviously, the decision makers make the decisions, like Ward Manuel, Santa Ono, guys like that in the prominent positions. But, yeah, look, on the self-imposed suspension, I agree. It didn't do anything to really lessen the blow, it seems like, because Harbaugh got a 4-year show cause, including a 1-year suspension. But I don't think they were giving that punishment out if he were still in college football. It's kind of an FU on the way out the door to Jim Harbaugh, knowing that if he were still in college football, he would fight it. Now he's focusing on the Chargers. Of course, they handed out right before his season, his first preseason game the other day, which I watched part of, by the way, at my Chargers. And so not good. They took him 7 drives to get a first down. Easton Stick is not the answer at quarterback. I will tell you that. But yeah, so that's kind of how I feel about that. Is that I don't know that we can use that case as an indicator of whether or not self-imposed suspensions work, because one, there are examples of it in the past of other teams self-imposing punishments and that lessening the blow at the end from the NCAA. And two, they only gave him this punishment because he was out of college football, and he's not going to fight it. So it looks like he's not going to.
Yeah, I mean, there's no need to bother with that anymore, honestly. Like, I think that the odds are very heavy on that he's probably never coaching college football again. So ultimately feels kind of toothless to me. This question is from Craig T, who says, what is the benefit to playing a tough non-conference opponent? How much of a benefit did last year's team have by not playing a tough non-conference schedule, i.e. keeping guys healthy, developing depth because you play more guys, get to focus on just the 2 big games, etc.? Now that things are where they are with the Big Ten, I don't know if there is really a benefit to scheduling a home and home with an SEC school or anything like that. Now, certainly it does add a little bit of grace to your resume when it's time to select college football playoff teams. But we know, like, these Big Ten schedules are going to rotate. Like, it's not every year that Michigan's going to play Oregon and Washington and Ohio State and USC all at once. But then again, TV kind of rules the day when it comes to all this. And Michigan probably always will play one of the tougher schedules in the Big Ten. So I'd love to see them play 3 Power 5 teams in the non-conference, but is there a benefit to them to do that? Probably not. I think what it did for them last year was, I mean, they were less physical in camp, keeping guys healthy. And all these guys who had been through a ton of battles already. It kind of lent itself to that ramp up into the meat and potatoes of the season. But for me, I think moving forward, I think when you have a younger team, certainly having a Texas in week 2, that's kind of a jump start to your entire season. But I don't know if there is a benefit to it. And I'd be interested to see how that plays out moving forward.
The benefit is strength of schedule and being able to get a big win. But the Big Ten is so competitive now that, like we said, they're going to get 4 or 5 teams in, right? At least 3 every single year. If you go 11-1, 10-2, probably as a Michigan, regardless of how your Big Ten schedule plays out, you're probably going to get in. So you don't need to schedule any more of the Texas and Oklahomas necessarily like Michigan has here for the next 4 years, going at Oklahoma next year and then hosting the Sooners in 26 and going at Texas in 27. So that would be the benefit. I think another one of the positives is that it doesn't hurt you as much now with the 12-team college football playoff if you were to lose one of those games. So there's less risk of scheduling some of these. So maybe we will see a little bit more of these types of games, marquee non-conference games scheduled, but I'm not exactly sure that everyone's going to go for that, because again, one win could be the difference at the end of the year of whether or not you get in. But yeah, it's kind of funny because last year's team would have been ready to face big-time opponents right away. They just didn't have to, right? They had to get a little healthier in the secondary especially, and it was nice to be able to get Blake Corum up to speed coming off of his own injury and let him kind of ramp up. But last year's team had so many proven commodities. This year's team, much less proven commodities, but they got to be ready to go early. So it's kind of an interesting little contrast there.
I want to reach into the grab bag for the last few here. We probably got time for 2 more.
EO 0707, you can bring back 3 players from the Harbaugh era: quarterback, but cannot be JJ, any other offensive player, any defensive player. Who are the players and how much do they elevate this team's ceiling?
QB, but cannot be JJ. Can I say for this year's team, can I say a healthy Wilton Spate? Is that allowed? Is that a good one? I mean, I feel like if I say Shea Patterson, because I like having my quarterback be a little more mobile, but people say, oh, well, did he spend the whole offseason working on a short game and stuff
There's
like
a
that?
golf simulator in the locker room now, Anthony.
You're right. He could probably scratch that itch. I'll change my pick. It would be Shea Patterson.
Or would he only be at the golf center?
Well, that's true, too.
I'm joking. Well, I would take Rudock.
Okay.
I would take Jake Rudock slightly over Shea Patterson. Any other offensive player is really interesting. I mean, could I go with Roman Wilson? Or probably Blake Corum. I mean, I would go Blake Corum.
Yeah, Blake Corum, and then any defensive player.
Aiden Jabril.
I mean, Aiden Hutchinson is that's just the pick. I mean, he was the straw that stirred the drink that year. So that would be my pick.
Yeah, he can take over a game. Someone that can take over a game. When you already have talent on this defense, really high level talent, I'd say anyone that could take over a game. Maybe one of the corners like a Jordan Lewis would be pretty sick, just because this team has a question mark at the opposite corner of.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, can I say Rod Moore? Like, it'd be great to have a healthy Rod Moore this year. Here's the thing about Aiden Hutchinson that's interesting is, he set the single season record for sacks at Michigan, right? With 14, I think it was.
Yes.
14 and a half, something like that.
14.
Can you imagine if you had Aiden Hutchinson with even one of the 2 defensive tackles that they have right now, let alone both of them? I mean, would he have had 17 sacks? Would he have had 18 sacks? I mean,
or 12.
It's no shade Chris Hinton and Mozzie Smith, but I mean, those guys were just more kind of like hold your ground, eat up space.
Well, that's kind of what they were asked to do, it felt like. But then, but to your point, that's what these guys are also getting asked to do. But really, last year in particular, that D line, by nature of asking them to do that, destroy blocks, that sort of thing, they were just so good that they went above and beyond that, and they had so much depth too. You're right, and maybe he'd have 12 sacks because the other guys would get some themselves. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, guys like that. But no, he probably would have gotten more, which is insane to say. So yeah, I mean, probably Aiden, but I could see going with a corner like Jordan Lewis, David Long. Great question. I love that question. It's not going to happen though. They're not. No. There aren't those free agents out there before the year, so you got to go with what you got.
Yeah. Let's take the last one.
Sasquatch.
Oh, of course. Easy yes.
Sasquatch 616, one of the great posters, says, I know Michigan is a football school, and in turn, this is more predominantly a football-driven site. But as the seasons get closer and I read more about the job Dusty May is doing with the basketball program, I find myself more excited about Michigan basketball than I have been in some time. How would you describe your excitement level for basketball in relation to your excitement level for football? He gives us a multiple choice question. I usually just fill out the bubble C for these, but we'll read them off. A, football is the only sport that matters. B, looking forward to seeing how the basketball team is doing after football season is over. C, equally excited about both teams. D, I think I might actually be more excited about basketball this year. E, this is just a job. I hate sports. Yeah, I'd go E. I'm just kidding. But, well, here's the thing that I find funny because I've never been in this spot. I was very young when Michigan won its last national championship. When you win the national title, you don't necessarily need that next season to come that quickly because you're simply known as national champions all summer, all off season. And when basketball is shaping up to be this exciting, you kind of, I see exactly what Sasquatch is saying. I've talked to other Michigan fans that share that same sentiment about their excitement for basketball. I wouldn't say it's equal for me in terms of C, just because football is almost here and it's football. I'd say I'm a little more excited for football, but I would maybe answer it with C just because the other options don't fit for me. Like, also we get paid to see how the basketball team is doing before football season's over, so that's not really an option for us. Option B, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest would be C, but it's going to be, that could change come early November when like Oregon comes to Ann Arbor. I mean, that game, regardless of what precedes it, is going to kind of be all right, are they in this Big Ten championship race or not? Are they in the mix for the college football playoff or not when that game arrives? It could be Michigan beats Oregon and the basketball season starts like a week later and you're like holy crap. Yeah. Holy crap. Things are awesome. Like, I'm so excited for all of it. Or it could be maybe the football team's not what we expected it to be. And then people sort of pivot their attention to the football. I mean, people will never pivot from football to basketball. Even when there was the hashtag basketball school stuff, in the early the early 2010s or whatever it was. It's a football school. But I think, knowing that you have, I think, two pretty competent and qualified guys in your two biggest programs, I think that's exciting. It's fair to be excited for both. So I don't put it one or the other. I know that it kind of marks the line of busy and more busy for us regardless, but I'm excited to see both. So football is not the only thing that matters, but it is the thing that matters the most.
Can we got two more rapid fire. I think they're good. Should we rapid fire them?
Rapid fire them.
Pontificate says, who are some of the players that are not projected starters, both sides of the ball, that we will be talking about at the end of the year that surprised with their contributions? Off the top of my head, can I go Cole Sullivan on defense? And on offense, maybe Jordan Marshall or CJ Charleston at wideout, I think. Someone that could surprise. We also have actually, let's just combine them. Another question. Give me your surprise impact player on each side of the ball. So,
I mean, are these kind of both in the same pot then?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just give you two on each side of the ball and make everything fair for everyone. I could see Amorian Walker by year's end being a guy we're like, whoa, where did that come from? On offense, Jordan Marshall would certainly be in that boat as well. I think we think very highly of him, but the layperson is probably more excited for Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings. Defensively, I feel like we just keep hearing more hype about Dom Nichols. I don't know how much of that's going to play out early on, but I do think that the snaps at edge 4 are kind of up for grabs, and I think will be fairly fluid throughout the year. So I could see him being in the mix for that. And then I'm trying to think of other freshmen.
And they don't have.
Here's a wild card for you, only because his name came up today. Later on in the season, Josiah Edmond at cornerback. I think that he could be an interesting guy to maybe keep an eye on. Certainly, obviously for next year, but towards the latter stages of this year, especially if like Amir Hall or Ricky Johnson get banged up at some point, he could be interesting. So just a name that popped in my head because he came up earlier today. So is that it?
I like it. Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us here on the Monday, August 12th edition of the Wolverine podcast. Again, be sure to like this video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Use that promo code UM1 for 2 months of access to the Wolverine for only $1. And we're, for audio versions, we're wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, I believe. If we're not somewhere that you listen to your podcasts, let us know and we'll get that figured out for you. So for Clayton Safey, for our producer, Megan, behind the scenes. We'll be back later this week with a show as we inch closer and closer to football season. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again next time.